Hey everyone, welcome to this brand new Flutter Dev series where we'll be looking at creating a chat app the right way. As from our introduction video, there are a few technologies involved, and so in this video, we'll be setting up our dev environment, that is setting up Docker and our Rethink DB instance so that we can get ready to start our code. So the first thing is to go to docker.com and to download Docker Desktop. So if you are on a Windows machine, then you can download that version, or if you are on the Mac, you can get that. And after you have downloaded that and installed it and have it running, you can check to see if it's working properly by running Docker version from your command line, and it will tell you the version. Then you can see that the Docker engine, my Docker engine is up, my Docker server is up since I've already installed it. And after you have installed Docker and verified by checking the version, then we can go over to Rethink DB website and fetch this Docker command right here. I'm just gonna copy and paste into my command line. And here we can get our Docker container up and running with our Rethink DB instance. But this means Docker run, detach means run in the background. P here represents the port, and the name is the name of the container, and Rethink DB is the image that we're fetching from Docker Hub to run. So for our port, I want us to set our port to be port 8080. So what this means is that port 8080 from our host machine will point to port 8080 inside of our container. And since I know that Rethink DB runs, that the client runs on port 8080, then I want to point port 8080 from our host machine to that port inside of the container. Now I'm not going to run this because I already have the container installed or already created. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to say docker container start rethink 1, since that's the name of the container. And if I go ahead and start that container, then you see the container is running. So now if I should go back here and go to localhost port 8080, then you can see I'm accessing my Rethink dashboard. So now I'm connected to my Rethink database server, and I can perform various database actions. As you can see, it has also created a test database for me here. So this is where we will connect inside of our application. And Rethink DB is a real-time database, which is somewhat a Firebase substitute that is very robust and fast. So you guys can check that out further. Now, inside of VS Code, I have already created the app, my Flutter app. And as you can see also from my Docker extension here, it shows the container that I have running and how long the container has been active, and this Rethink DB image that was fetched from Docker Hub. And as you try to install Docker, it might ask you for your Docker Hub credentials. So there's a possibility that you might need to create an account on Docker Hub. So that is easy to set up. So I've created my Flutter app here, but instead of working inside of the main app, which with my lib folder and my main, what I'm going to do is to create a package, and this package is going to represent the chat module that will encompass all the services and those models that are specific to the chat application or the chat service. In this case, we call it the app service. So I'm just going to go ahead and say Flutter create, I'm going to use template equal to package, and I'm just going to give the package a name. I'm just going to name it chat, and this will create a Flutter package here, which is a chat package, and inside here will work for all our chat services. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close VS Code. I'm going to open my terminal. I'm going to cd into that chat and then open VS Code there. So I'm working directly inside of that service or inside of that module, and do not have to be clustered with the other things from the main module. So I'm also going to go ahead and hide using my hide extension, VS Code extension, to hide some of these just to make the view less cluttered. I'm just going to say hide. I'm just going to hide all these. So I have gone ahead and hide all the unnecessary folders that I do not need to see in order for me to write my code. Make it less cluttered, easier to work with and access the different folders. So now inside my pubspec YAML file, I want to add, I'm going to go to pubspec assist and I'm going to add the rethink db package. So that should add the rethink, save, then we are good to go. So now I will go inside my lib folder, and here I'm going to create a source folder. Then in my source folder, I'll create models and I'll create services. And then my first model that I want to create is, of course, my user model, since I'll start with the user service. So I'll go ahead and create my user model, and for this, for our user, I want to have their username, also their photo URL, so I'm gonna have a private ID, since this ID will be returned by or created by Rethink when we create a new user. And I also want a last seen. So inside of our constructor, I'll add all those. So I'm gonna say string username and my last seen. Now I also want to make all these required. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say at required and import that from foundation. And for our ID, I'm just gonna make this a getter so that the user ID can be fetched but not modified. Also, I'm gonna create a few methods that will convert this to the appropriate JSON representation and from JSON to our user. So here is our JSON method, which maps all the fields or properties of our user to a JSON object. Similar thing for or from JSON, I'm just going to create a factory, say user from JSON. This will accept a map, which is our JSON object, and will return our user objects. I'm just going to create a user here and add all those properties from the JSON object. So our username will be JSON username, and then for our ID, since it's a private variable, I'll have to set it here to the ID that is returned from the database. So whenever a user is added, the database will generate an ID for that user, and we will set the ID here. Then we'll just return that user. So this is our user model, and now we can go into our services, and I'm gonna add another folder, and inside here I'll add my user service. I'm just gonna say user service contract, and contract here represents like an interface or an abstraction, so that our code will always depend on abstraction, so it will be easily to switch out parts. So if I decided at some point to change from Rethink DB to Firebase, I'll just create a Firebase user service and just plug that into my app, and it should work seamlessly. So for this, I'm gonna say abstract class I user service, and I want here a few methods. I want this connect method, and this connect will accept a user and return a user. So this will accept a user object that is coming in for the first time without an ID. Once the user is connected, an ID will return, so the user object will be returned with the created ID. I also want my user service to give me a list of users when I ask for those for persons who are online. And I want also to be able to disconnect the particular user. All right, so to create our user service implementation now, just gonna jump inside of our test, get rid of this, and I am going to create a helper for our test first. So this helper will basically set up our database for testing. So I'm just gonna say a few methods inside here, future void method to create DB, and this method will accept an instance of rethink and also a connection to that database. These packages come from rethink db dart. So I'm just gonna say await r, and there's a method called db create. I want to create a test db if it is not there, and you use the run method and pass in the connection in order to execute that rethink method. So I'm gonna also catch the error just in case the test database already exists. I'm just gonna catch that error and do nothing with it. So that's create the DB, and I also want another method to basically clean up after. So clean DB, and it's the same thing, an instance of rethink along with the connection, and what I want to say is to say rethink, give me a table. So the name of the table, give me users, since I am now working with user service, and I want to delete or clean up that table and pass in the connection again. I also need to create the table here. So rethink table create the users table, run, pass in the connection, and also catch the error just in case the table is already there, and do nothing. So now I have my helper here. I can use it inside of my tests. So inside of my test, go ahead and write a test for my user service. So user service tests. Just gonna say void main. I'm just gonna set up rethink db here equal to rethink instance. Then I need a connection also, so I'm gonna define a connection here, and then the system under test, which is our user service, which we have not created as yet. So inside of our setup, I'm gonna say that establish a connection to the database. So I'm gonna say connection is equal to rethink connect, and I'm gonna tell it the host. In this case, it is host 127, which is localhost, of course, 01, and the rethink port, the client port, not the admin port. The client port is 28015. But since I am using Docker, I will need to find what port from my host machine connect to this particular port inside of my Docker container. So we'll do that in a few. But for now, we say establish the connection, and then after we establish the connection, we call our helper method, create DB, pass in our rethink instance, pass in the connection. Then we can say instantiate our user service with the same instance of rethink and the same connection. So our user service will use these to perform various operations. So now if we go back to our user service and create our user service IMPL or implementation, so it's gonna say class user service implements user service. Go ahead, create those methods, and the first method I want to create is the connect method. So for our connect method, I am getting that user object. I'm just gonna say data here should be user to JSON. And after I've converted my user object to JSON, I want to check if the user, if the ID of the user is not null. That means this is an existing user that is trying to connect. So if the user is not null, if the ID is not null, then I'm gonna set the ID property of my data, which is now a JSON object. I'm gonna set it to the user ID. So what happened here is that rethink if ID is not present, the field ID in your JSON object, rethink will automatically create an ID. If an ID is there, then rethink will use that ID as an existing user, and then we'll update that user instead of create a new user. So now I'm gonna say final result of rethink, which is to await. Let me make this method async. Rethink await connect to this table, which is a users table, and insert the data. But first, there's no, I have not created a connection or my rethink instance. So I create my connection, go ahead and create my rethink instance, which I will receive inside of my constructor. So these are this connection. So now I have my connection and I have rethink instance. Can go ahead and insert data. So I'm gonna insert that JSON data and I'm gonna say add a few config here to tell rethink how to behave with this data. So I'm gonna say if there's a conflict, that is if this user exists already based on the ID, go ahead and update that user. And also I want rethink to return changes. So what this does is that whenever the user is created, if it's a first time seeing this user and the user is created, rethink will return the changes, and then from that change I'll create a new user object to return, and that new user object will have the ID of the created user, the ID generated by the database, which is a UUID. So I'm gonna say return user from JSON result. Inside of a result, I'm gonna fetch the changes. Then I'm gonna say the first change, and then there's a property in that known as new val. So each change returned by rethink would have like an old value and a new value as JSON object. So what I'm doing is fetch the new value JSON object and create a user from that. So now we have our connect method up and running. And as you can see here, even though I've called the insert method, I have not run this rethink query. So I have to go ahead and say run and pass in the connection. Now it will connect and execute the query. So there is our connect method. Go ahead and import this. And for our first test, I want to check that the user is actually created in our rethink database. So I create a user here and then call the connect method, pass in the user, and I'm expecting that the user that is returned should have an ID. Also, I want to add a tear down method so that when the tests are finished, I want to say clean up the DB. So clean up our test database so that new tests can be executed. So now if I should run this, I'm expecting a failure. It shouldn't be able to connect to the database. So as intended, our test fails, and that is because it cannot find this port on our Docker container, since we have not configured our host machine to point to that port inside of our container. So what we have to do is to go here to our prompt, and we are going to say docker container stop and rethink one, which was the name of the container. It should stop the container. After we have stopped the container, you can say, go ahead, say docker container prune. That is to remove all stopped containers unless you already have Docker running and using it for other stuff, then you shouldn't use prune. You should use docker remove to remove the specific container. So after that, what we want to do again is to say docker run in detach mode, port, we're gonna say port 8080 from our host maps to port 8080 inside the container, and we're gonna say port 28015, which is the client driver port, maps to 28015 inside of our container. Rethink db. So if we go ahead, create that, our container should be running. Now if we go back to our test, execute, now we have our test passing. It has created a user inside the database. And if I should say, if I should remove the cleanup and run it, it is passing. So now if I should go here, then I should say a user table with a single user, with everything being null, which suggests that our data is not being passed or saved here. So back to our code, side of our let's go again, run the tests. So the reason our database is showing null is because we were actually passing null. So inside of our user class, we were not initializing these variables at all. So now if I just say this instead of string, so that it is initialized with whatever is passed inside of constructor, or else I would have to set the variables inside of the constructor itself. So now that I have initialized the variables, when I run my test and go to my database, as you can see here, this user is written to the database. So now let me clean and run again, and our test is passing. So I'm just gonna go quickly into the next test, which is a simple test. And what this test does is to get the users that are online. So what I've done is create a user, connect with that user, and then fetch all users online. And I'm expecting that the length should be 1, since I'm the only user connected. No, but this test will fail since I've not implemented the method. So let us go here and implement our online method. So for this method, I am basically gonna tell rethink to, let me make this into an async method. I'm gonna tell rethink to go to the table users and filter. So what this is gonna go directly and select records based on this filter. So I'm gonna say I want records where active is true, then pass in my connection to execute the query. Now this query returns what is called a cursor. So rethink have what is called a cursor, which is like a stream, and the cursor is basically a stream of data. And to get the actual data from the stream, I have to go ahead and say user list equal await users to list. So I'm basically fetching all the users from that cursor, which is a stream. Then I'm just gonna say return user list and go ahead and map. In this case, I'm just gonna map the item return, and that item I'm gonna say from JSON and pass in that item. So I now map that item, each item in that list, to a user model and return the new created list of users. So now if I should go to my test and execute my test, then I expect that it should pass, hopefully. And there we have it. We are getting our online users, which is great. So now for our disconnect method, which is a pretty simple method, because to disconnect, all we're going to do is to say await rethink, give me the user table, users table, and I'm just gonna update, which user. I'm gonna set the ID here, user ID, to tell it which user to update, and this should be a JSON object, and I'm gonna update the active to false. Now you are offline, the user is offline. And then the last scene is going to be no. So that was the last time this user was seen. Again, run the connection. Then I'm just gonna go ahead and close the connection also for this user, so the connection is not held in memory. So there we have our user service, we have our connect method, we have our disconnect method, and we have our online users. There might possibly be other methods that we add as we go along, but for now these are the three main methods that we'll be using, and we have written some tests here for those methods. Well, I have not written a test for the disconnect method because it's pretty similar to the connect method. So this is the first video in the series, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and please like, share, subscribe, help the channel grow so that we might continue to put out good content and improve our skills as Flutter developers. So thank you for tuning in, and see you in the next video.